And you might even play better if you're a little bit more relaxed. I mean,
Yes.
scientifically, right, from a biomechanics standpoint, you probably know this having gone through a kinesiology program. Like they say that the athlete, like let's take a sprinter, for example. They actually say that the sprinter who is instructed to sprint at about 90% of their max speed will run faster than the sprinter who's instructed to run at 100% of their max speed, which might
Yeah.
sound a bit counterintuitive to think about. Like, well, wouldn't the sprinter who's running at 100% of their capabilities run faster than the one at 90%? And that's not necessarily true. And here's why. Because if you are maximally contracting 100% of your muscle mass, then you actually kind of interrupt the proper function of certain muscles that you want to be firing because the agonist and the antagonist are sort of both firing at the same time instead of
Hmm.
one of them relaxing to let the other one do its job. So you can
Hmm.
actually run faster if you're running at 90% exertion relative to 100% exertion. So the same thing could be true for basketball. Like you want to have 90 to 95% focus and intensity, but not 100% because then you're maybe getting in your own way a little bit.
Yeah, and a lot of coaches, mine included, will be like, "Give me 100%," or they'll even do the like corny, "Give me 110%." When it's like, all right, well,
Sure.
110, come on. But it's true. Like one athlete, I've seen it with a lot of them, but one athlete comes to mind when I was watching the '08 Beijing Olympics. Apollo Ono. Apollo Ono. He's a skater, and when he was doing his warm up laps, he would be yawning, and then he would get interviews where it's like, "What, are you tired? Like, are you calm? Are you like not like fired up?" And he would be like, "No, like I'm. That's my ritual to relax myself, calm, and perform at the level that he needs to." And I thought it was super interesting. I was 9 years old at the time, so I don't know how it stuck with me, but like the guy who's a world class Olympic gold medalist is yawning as he's doing his warm up laps right before his competition. And I think that speaks volumes where it's like, yes, you got to be focused. You got to do all those things that every athlete needs to do to perform. But there still has to be some leeway where you can let your talent, your ability, your practice carry you and not have to be so tense, you know?
Yeah, I mean, from a sports psych perspective, we would call that the zone of optimal performance or the zone of optimal functioning.
Flow, flow.
Yeah, flow state by any number of other terms, the inverted U theory, if we want to get
Yep.
sort of theoretical about it, and what that is just briefly, and then we'll move on. But just because we're talking about it, right? If you are too under aroused, like you just got up from a nap, like you have zero arousal, you're probably not going to perform your best. You're zoned out, you're distracted, you're paying attention to fans, Lord knows what else you're thinking about, what's what
Mm-hmm.
you're going to eat after the game, who knows what. Like you're probably not going to perform your best. And if you're over activated to the point of like anxiety and heart slamming in your chest and you're just like sweating bullets before you're even in the game, you're
Yep.
listening to music that's way too overactivated, you're too tense, that's also not going to do you any favors. But somewhere in the middle is a level of activation, and this is different for every person, will be your zone of sort of optimal functioning. And to your example, Apollo Ono, maybe he didn't want to be too overactivated, so he was kind of like yawning to like activate his parasympathetic nervous system. Let's chill out a little bit because those high pressure, high stress situations, the Olympics, the whole world is watching. Like you don't want to be too overstimulated because he knew that it was going to be detrimental to his performance, and so that's basically what that's all about.
Yeah, that's a perfect explanation. The inverted U theory is what I was thinking of. Um, and I kept thinking bell shaped curve, but I was like, there's a theory, and inverted U is what it is. And I
Yeah.
think it's so relevant, and that's that's not a part of a pregame speech. That's not a part of training or practice. Like you kind of got to figure that out, unless you have and you're fortunate to have a sports psychologist part of your team, or you came across that in some manner. But it's a fact because not only do we know it scientifically, but like you can see it when you are aware of those principles and theories. You can see that when you watch competition. And it perfectly said, it's different for everyone. So you may see someone like Draymond Green or Dylan Brooks who's just like 10 out of 10 fired up all the time, or like Pat Bev, like he's a good example.
11 out of 10, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah, like so much. But shit, at the end of the day, they're making millions of dollars playing at the highest level of basketball. And so
That works for them.
yeah, like that works for them. And who knows, maybe they would play better if they were like 95% intense. But we'll never know that because they're doing it professionally. But like other players, gosh, I'm trying to think. Like DeMar DeRozan is an example. Like he ties his shoes really loosely. Like he hardly even ties his shoes, and he's very like even keeled. There's other players I'm trying to think of, but like if you watch enough sports, not every player is gonna be fire coming out of their ears.
Yeah.
Nostrils flaring, freaking out about.
They almost look like they don't even care.
Yep.
As compared to some of these other athletes. Shea Gilgeous-Alexander is one that comes to mind.
That's a great
Like,
example.
very, very even keel. Doesn't really show emotion too much.
Kawhi Leonard.
Hardly ever see him like yelling at or complaining to the refs. He just goes about his business. Probably going to win the MVP of the NBA this year.
He should.
Led the league in scoring, and he's just like very. He almost just looks like chill, like unbothered.
Yeah, he's a really good example. And I think an old-fashioned way to look at it, which I think a lot of coaches, coming back to that like pregame speech and what they expect of their players, is to expect like the 100% intensity. But there's a reason in teams there's roles, and there can be a role of like an instigator, a leader by example who's fired up and has that impact on the team. And then you have like your top dog leader like a Shea or Kawhi Leonard who's just kind of doing his thing, leads by example, guides everyone where they needs to be, and they bring like a level of calmness to the squad.